four of those, and then, or three of those, and then this one. Four altogether.
Okay. We are going to start with 2 prize draws from UBCIC. And so once again, you have to be in the room to win. If this is a completed questionnaire, bring it to the ISK booth and they'll give you a ticket. Okay, so this is for the UBCIC. So we need, where's our bowl? Come on, Harold, get with the program.
Yeah. Coffee.
Can I get a drum roll again? Okay.
Better, much better.
Bonnie Jacobson. Is Bonnie in the room? Too bad for Bonnie. How about Scott? Oh, Bonnie's here? Okay, let's put our hands together for Bonnie, winning a prize from UBCIC. And if you can just come up and claim your prize if you're able, that's great. So Scott H. from TACLA. Is that you? Oh, congratulations. Oh, you're waiting. He was ready. Are you sure you didn't rig this? Yeah. Let's put our hands together for Scott, our second prize winner from UBCIC. And then we also have a prize here from BCAFN. Karen Bono from Peters. Karen Bono, are you in the room? Going once, going twice? Okay. Can I get a drum roll? Chief Angie Bailey. Is Angie in the room? Some enthusiasm over here. Angie clearly has friends in the room. Okay, how about Jim Tatouche from Hoopachesset? Is Jim in the room? Jim, okay. Donna Aljam, Donna A. from Nikomen. Yeah? Congratulations. Let's put our hands together for Donna. And these can go back in. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to pull a ticket. If you completed an Indigenous Services Canada questionnaire and returned it to either the ISK or the Ask Me booth, you will have gotten one of these beautiful yellow tickets to win, to be pulled for a prize, which is a beautiful blanket up here in a paper bag. Your odds are looking pretty good. There's about 10 tickets in here, and they do have phone numbers, so if you're not in the room, you could still win. But just before I do this prize draw, I would like to invite Cheryl Kazmer to the stage to very quickly give us a heads up about an important event that's coming up. Put your hands together for Cheryl Kazmer.
Thank you, Jessie. If you put it up now, please. I just recently became a part of a planning committee that is helping organize this conference that you see on the screen. It's called Women Deliver 2019. Vancouver is going to host it this year from June 3rd to the 6th. They're expecting about 6,000 to 7,000 women to come to this forum from all around the world. And it's all about gender equality, health issues, rights and well-being of girls and women, and it's to serve as a catalyst for advocates working to achieve a more gender-equal world. The day before is going to be a conference that's specific to Indigenous issues, and so that's the committee that I'm working on as well, and we're setting up a similar format to the Women Deliver conference. So just wanted to bring this to your attention. I think it's an awesome opportunity for women leadership and our young women who are interested in leadership to be a part of this conference, and I'm really encouraging communities and nations to look at sponsoring and sending a woman to this very important conference. So keep your eyes peeled for more information. You can actually go to their website too. It has the registration there if you're interested. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for that announcement. And just to let folks know, if you also have announcements you'd like to make at the end of lunch breaks, just come and let Harold and I know tomorrow. So once again, this is the prize draw for the beautiful blanket that's been supplied by Indigenous Services Canada for those that filled out the questionnaire. Can we get a drum roll? A really good one. This is our last one. Okay, Gabe Williams. Is Gabe in the room? Gabe Williams. Well, that's okay. Gabe's in luck.
It's at my house in Plenary.
Because Harold's going to take it as a gift of appreciation. No, just kidding. We have Gabe's phone number and email here, and so we'll make sure that they get the blanket.
Brian and Paul are here.
Great, great. If we could put our hands together just briefly for the folks that have supplied door prizes for us, that would be great. If we could acknowledge UBCIC, AFN, and Indigenous Services Canada. Maybe this is a really nice time also to quickly put our hands together for the folks that prepared that beautiful meal for us. So we're going now into our first plenary of the afternoon, and so I'm going to invite our speakers to come on up to the stage, and then I'll give some opening comments. So we've got Chief David Jimmy, Brian Titus, and Paul Topple, our three speakers on our next plenary on the new fiscal relationship. So if you three could come on up and join me, that would be wonderful. And let's put our hands together for these three folks just to give them a warm welcome on up here as we kick off our afternoon. This plenary, as it says in the agenda, is simply an update and discussion on the new fiscal relationship. We've heard it mentioned many times this morning and yesterday, the significance of this important work. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from each of our three speakers an update on the new fiscal relationship, including an update on the 10-year grants. And the speaking order will actually be reversed from what is in the agenda. So we'll be starting with Mr. Topple, who is the Chief Finances, Results and Delivery Officer for Indigenous Services Canada. Following him will be Brian Titus, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the First Nations Financial Management Board. Welcome, Mr. Titus. And then finally, Chief David Jimmy, well known to so many of us in the room from the Squala First Nation and the BCAFN representative on the AFN-ISC Joint Advisory Committee on Fiscal Relationships. And so we'll go in that reverse order from what the agenda says. We'll hear from all three gentlemen, and then if we have time before our 2 o'clock plenary, we will take some questions from the floor. So please, I'm not going to give any bio to try and leave as much time as possible for them to present, so please put your hands together and welcome to the microphone, Mr. Paul Topple.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the organizers for the invitation to participate at this forum on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. Very honored to be here and to be back at this joint gathering. So my talk this afternoon will focus on the ongoing work with the new fiscal relationship initiative, the context that we have been working in, and the journey we've embarked upon, together with First Nation community members across this country. I'll speak also about the 10-year grant itself, along with other major initiatives under the new fiscal relationship initiative, and how they all fit together. I'll hopefully speak to questions about how the grant is being designed, what programs will be included, what we know today about reporting and accountability, and what remains to be co-developed with First Nation community members across the country, and some next steps and timeline for having more information for you. So I think to begin with, I think it's a fair comment to say that when we discuss the topic of a new fiscal relationship between Canada and First Nations peoples, I think it's a fair comment to say that there's absolutely no trust or confidence in that topic based on the history and the track record of this initiative to date. And why do I say such a bold or tough statement like that? And I think it's for two major reasons. One is, in Canadian history, this is the 8th or 9th attempt, depending upon how you count it, based on Canada trying to establish a new fiscal relationship with First Nations. And based on the progress to date, we can say that not much has been accomplished through those past initiatives. And I think a second major driver of essentially the dismal track record has been the history of how the former INAC has worked with First Nations in terms of delivery of services. As you recall, decades ago, it was the former INAC that kind of actually did the actual delivery on reserve, for those who may remember that. And then that didn't work out. We didn't provide those services in a credible or service-oriented way. Then that transformed to another way, which is through funding agreements, whereby we asked you to deliver it, but we never gave you the capacity dollars to really do so. And then we really told you how to do it. We did it through these funding agreements with explicit terms and conditions on how you should deliver every program, and we also told you what type of expenditure was eligible in order to facilitate that. So in a sense, nothing really changed. We went from direct delivery to a funding agreement, but we didn't give you the conditions for success either. So I think it's fair to say that when we look at the history and as we embark upon this initiative, I think it's fair to say that people in this room and elsewhere across the country are skeptical and are cynical that anything will be accomplished through this attempt. So this is why when we started, mindful of that history, we thought it was very important to actually get some wins, some small wins, to generate some positive momentum and perhaps a little bit of trust and confidence, knowing that we have so much work to do and that we're still going to work for the big prize on systemic structural reform. But that where we started, we had to start somewhere and somewhere quickly, and that was really what we had tried to accomplish. So I think you may know that there are kind of a number of new fiscal relationship initiatives at play. I think there was a workshop yesterday whereby for those who are under self-government agreements, there's a new fiscal relationship there that's being worked out called the Collaborative Fiscal Policy Initiative. And then there is, for those First Nations under the Indian Act, and notwithstanding the fact that there are two, there are a lot of intersects. And every issue that's being addressed at either table is being also looked at the other table. So it's mutually reinforcing and to ensure best practices, and that obviously needs-based funding is part of that equation. So what has happened so far? Well, we've been working with a number of other federal government departments because we know that the problem is systemic and it's across government, although a lot of the issues is led from the former INAC for sure. And we've been working on some technical working groups to kind of do some research on what we can do to deal with the issue of sufficient, predictable, and sustained funding. You may know that because you have been maybe part of it, we went through a cross-country engagement across the country in the fall of 2017 to hear from First Nation community members about their issues that they would have put on the table that they felt needed to be addressed under this initiative. And then what we did was we collected all that feedback from First Nation community members across the country, and we made this report. The cover of it is on the screen. And then we submitted it to the Minister of Indigenous Services and the National Chief of the Assembly and said, hey, we've got a number of problems that need to be addressed. And then we said that a new fiscal relationship is not an initiative, it's a journey. And it's not going to be cracked at any one point in time. It's got to be a partnership between nations and Canada. And therefore, we need a permanent advisory body to kind of do a continued check-in on further recommendations as part of that ongoing relationship. So it's not an initiative, it's a journey. And that so much has to be done. I think the other thing we all agreed on was that we have to reform the default prevention management policy because it's not working. And that there has to be no more clawback of funds to pay for intervention services. We also said that we want to develop a more respectful financial transparency approach that is First Nation centric rather than the top-down imposed First Nations Financial Transparency Act. And we got to figure out a mechanism of accountability that works between chief and council and community members rather than what is the dynamic now of accountability, which is between chiefs and Canada, which doesn't work for community members. And then we felt that we should offer a 10-year grant to First Nations who are eligible in order to provide flexibility and predictability. And we'll talk about that a bit further. So you will see in this slide what is a more elaborate kind of recommendations and what we have been pursuing in terms of the new fiscal relationship, in terms of some of these quick wins or positive stuff, knowing that the major structural work is still ongoing. So on the funding sufficiency issue, so as the ministers may have said, through 3 federal budgets so far of this government, $17 billion has been committed to Indigenous peoples, which is quite frankly a first good step, but so much more needs to be done. And then we also talked about the fact that we need to truly lift the 2% cap by having an ongoing new escalator. And so some of the research that's been doing on what is that future escalator has been landed at around 3.5% based on current cost and inflation and population pressures. And so that is a conversation that I'm having with the Department of Finance for hopefully trying to get that in the federal budget, but that's up to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet to decide. Funding flexibility. This is where the notion of a 10-year grant has come in, whereby First Nations can decide to do whatever they want with the money for what is those services that are part of the grant. So if you want not to spend it on a service, that's your prerogative. If you want to make a surplus on it, that's your prerogative. If you want to carry it over, that's your prerogative, and you don't need any permissions anymore. And because it's a 10-year plan, it's a 10-year profile on your funding agreement, then at least you know how to plan for your services for your community members. Then on the accountability dynamic, we have said we've got to straighten this out, whereby chiefs and council feel accountable to First Nation community members for the services delivered, rather than a chief feeling accountable to Canada or a bureaucrat. And this is where we've been working on what is that report at the community level that works for community members, and then we would simply get a copy of that as the new reporting mechanism, rather than all these reports by program areas that you constantly have to give to the bureaucracy, for which there's absolutely no benefit usually for the First Nation community members. And then, of course, governance. We have to deal with changing this default prevention and management policy. We have to not take away money from the band support funding for the payment of these advisors if required. And then we're also looking at what are some institutional supports that First Nation communities may need based on their, given maybe their size, in terms of helping them and looking at notions such as audit and statistics as certain institutions on that regard. This is not. May I ask for the next slide to be moved, please? Thank you. So one of those early wins that we're looking at to create the momentum and some trust and confidence in this initiative is the offering of a 10-year grant. As I said, everybody originally thought that this was going to be all new money. And so I'm sure that there is disappointment in the room that there is no money attached to this, right? Because we are dealing with the money through the federal budget window, and we are still putting in a number of requests for new money, such as the escalators through the federal budget process. The grant, however, is part of advancing self-determination by First Nations by recognizing that they know best what is the type of service that needs to be delivered at the community level without some national frame of terms and conditions for education or income assistance or assisted living or any of the services that are eligible under to a First Nation under the grant. And you guys decide the service that best works for your local priorities. And I would say that that's the only way a First Nation is going to ever advance on this self-determination, if you take control and not Canada telling you how to do it. Some other side benefits associated with that lack of restrictions on the grant is the fact that now if you want to get other levels of government to provide funding for those same levels of service, there is no clawbacks or restrictions for getting that. So the stacking provisions are substantively eliminated. And as I said before, there's no recipient audits for that part of the agreement. And we heard strongly from First Nation community members that because of all that reporting burden, effective service delivery was not being done. So the grant will essentially eliminate, compared to what's in the reporting for those programs, about a 90% reduction in data elements that you have to provide to Canada. And of course, the reporting is essentially from Chief and Council to community members and not to Canada. Next slide, please. Thank you. So somebody then says to me, so what's the difference between grant and then a contribution agreement, or set, fix, flex, or block? So what we tried to do is kind of show you the difference between these funding models to kind of give you that choice of funding agreements to understand what best works for you, because we know that there are a number of First Nations who may choose to never want to have grant, and that is your decision to have. This is all about your choice, and it's about providing options that's consistent with where you are in advancing your self-determination agenda. So on predictability, it provides a longer time horizon in terms of what your funding profile is at a base minimum. The program design is obviously the key feature, because under contribution or block, we're still telling you how to deliver it, right? So the Indian agent element of the former INAC is still contained in the contribution and the block, whereas under grant, it's gone. Funding flexibility is, as I said before, you do whatever you want. If you don't want to provide income assistance anymore, that's your prerogative. If you don't want to provide education, that's your prerogative. It's your money to do as your community wants you to do. And obviously, there's no terms and conditions, there's no eligible expenditures anymore. It's much like how the federal government provides money to a province for health and education or social services. We give you the money, you decide. And it's the same principle under grant. Payment schedule, there is a benefit, because now you'll get a check, if you want, lump sum at the beginning of the fiscal year. So you can be positive cash flow with that money. But just saying, if you run out, don't come calling. On eligibility criteria, I mean, essentially what it means is that you need to have a 5-year financial performance ratios done. And also you need a financial administration law that is approved by Chief and Council, and obviously, hopefully, accepted by your community members as well. On the departmental oversight, at least on the grant portion, there is no, as I said, stacking provisions, recipient audits. There's no compliance reviews of those expenditures you commit under the grant. That's your business. There is a monitoring role, however, that we will be doing together with FNFMB to kind of see how are you doing with regards to maintaining your eligibility, primarily from a service ethos of how are you doing in terms of the outcomes that you're reporting on related to your services to your community members. And if you're not being successful in improving your indicators of your service levels, then really the meeting is about, well, what can we do to help you improve on your service delivery to your community members, would be what the focus of that annual get-together would be. And then finally, the default prevention and management policy would not apply to the grant. So there's no intervention there. It's more about how do we work together to support you philosophy. Next slide. So what are those programs under contribution or block that would go in the grant? Well, these are all so I'll lift on the right side of that screen is essentially those programs for which you already are getting money, and all of that will go into one check for you as a block, and then you do whatever you want with it. So if you decide that you don't want to do any of that, that's your prerogative. If you want to spend more in one area versus another, that's your prerogative. If you want to redesign any of those programs to tailor it to local conditions, that's your prerogative, because it's your deal. There are still, as you note on this slide, a number of programs that are not in the block, and there will be ongoing conversations and discussions to figure out what more programs can be included in it. Next slide. So there have been, I think, a number of concerns based on First Nation community members across the country about, okay, so there's no new money. So is this like this typical former INAC of dump and run? Am I getting screwed this way? Because, I already talked about the failed history on the new fiscal relationship initiative. And so there must be something here whereby I'm going to get screwed, right? At least on the funding side, right? And if I was in your shoes, that's a really good question, right? So this is where the guiding principle that went to Cabinet said that no First Nation should lose funding as part of the switch to the grant. So if you're in a block, and if you're lucky to get an escalator on that block, that escalator still goes. So you get that. If you're in a non-block funding scenario, they will do an annual calculation to see whether there's any upside for you. But the principle is that even if it means that when we do the calculation there's downside, you still get to keep whatever you had. So this is only about, just to summarize, upward adjustments on an annual basis, but whatever you got going into it is you're good. And that's to deal with that skepticism, cynicism that I talked about earlier. And of course, if there's any new investments coming from future budgets, then you would get that too. And of course, the big issue is whether we get that escalator through the forthcoming federal budget, and then if we get that escalator, then that would be applied to all funding agreements, not just grants. Because quite frankly, the sufficiency is for everybody, and it's not just for those who are in grants. So we need that escalator for everybody. Next slide. So this is a bit of a complex diagram, but it's trying to demonstrate the feedback that we got that reporting burden was immense, and what the grant will do to reduce that reporting burden. Because what we've done in terms of the data elements is to say, can you believe it? A First Nation community, based on all the programs that you have to deliver, there's about 4,000 data elements that you got to do just for those under the grant. Can you believe it? Like, who's got the time to actually deliver any service to a community member because you're too busy trying to do a report for me? That's crazy. So if it's about service delivery enhancement to a community member, that means that the community administration needs to have the time to actually do that, and means less reporting to me, right? So on the grant, you go from 4,000 data elements down to 200. And that's going to be based on the fact that you are going to do an annual report like you already do. You'll include your annual audit financial statements, and you will then report out through your annual report to your committee members about how you're doing on your service delivery targets that you committed at the beginning of the year. And then that annual report is what you also give me a copy that you've already given to the community members, and we're done. So very simplified. Next. So, as I said, we got some quick wins in order to develop some trust and confidence based on that failed history. So, last year we gave you carryover provisions on all agreements. We're offering you the 10-year grant. We've reduced the reporting burden. And in a couple of weeks, we'll start giving you, for those under some level of default, some cash to hopefully reimburse you. It may not cover all costs for those who are having their band support levels clawed back to pay for a recipient advisor as a first element of the reform under the default prevention management policy, whereby there are clawbacks on band support, and that will start changing in a couple of weeks. And these are what I said, some down payments on trust as we go for the big reform. Now, the big reform is going to be done based on the committee, this AFN Indigenous Services Advisory Committee to the Minister, for which the Minister has actually met with the committee and has said, you have a blank slate to do whatever you want. There are no red lines. And this committee is made up of chiefs. Your BC chief is Chief Jimmy. Yeah, raise it up. Raise it up for your BC rep. And some technical experts in this complicated field. So we have the former Parliamentary Budget Officer of Canada, Kevin Page. We have a former Deputy Minister of Finance, Don Drummond, who used to be the Toronto Dominion Chief Economist. We have the Chairman of the First Nations Information Governance Centre to talk about statistics and data gathering on socioeconomic outcomes. We have financial expertise as well through the chairman of the First Nations Financial Management Board, as well as the CEO of the Aboriginal Finance Officers Association, as just a few technical experts for all to supplement the chiefs who are coming from every region of the country as well. And they are the ones that are currently developing the big structural reform proposals that are going to come your way, hopefully for cross-country engagement starting in May, June, driving towards the July AFN Chiefs Assembly. And I know that Chief Jimmy will give you hopefully some inside baseball kind of elements of what's been going on at the committee level. So just to conclude, because I know I have other colleagues here who want to contribute to this initiative, we know the failed history. I've talked about some initial positive wins, and I need your continued engagement and input on what needs to be reformed in a structural way as we continue this path forward on trying to have that journey of working together to continually improve the new fiscal relationship that benefits your community members. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Topple, for your candid appraisal of the relationship looking back, but also your detailed update on the mechanisms and new things that are taking place that we can appreciate moving forward. I know that's good news for many in the room. Thank you for being here. Our next speaker on the panel is Mr. Brian Titus, Chief Operating Officer for the First Nations Financial Management Board. Please put your hands together for Mr. Titus.
Hello, everybody. It's good to see a good crowd. Over the prior about 6 months or so, the FNB has been pretty busy meeting with a lot of First Nations across the country and telling them what our role in regards to the 10-year agreements. It was quite a task that was given to us. For those that do not really know what the FNB is about, we're the only legislative body under the Fiscal Management Act to certify First Nations. We set standards in regards to financial management and good governance. So we've been doing that since 2006. We got offices now, West Vancouver, which is our headquarters, and then we have an office in Winnipeg, Ottawa, and Montreal. We have a small satellite office in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. We have approximately right now about 50 employees that work for us, and we're planning to grow further. But it was quite a historic year for us at the FNB as we worked through this process with the federal government, and I'll give the results as I go on. What our role was to support the First Nations in the process of the evaluation process to meet the eligibility criteria for the 10-year grant process. We also worked with ISC and the AFN. The AFN and ISC both agreed that the FMB would be the organization to help set the eligibility criteria around that. Also, just to make sure everybody knows, although that we make the recommendations, we do not make the final decision. That is made solely by ISC. So if somebody that's what it comes down to. We do have a board that's from across the country that looks at our processes. The rationale behind it was that because we have established standards for finances and governance and best practices. Our standards are based on internationally recognized internal control frameworks. Our standards have also been vetted by rating agencies. For the debenture processes. So what the government was saying is like, okay, so if the First Nations are out there and they got $500 million in the open market, why do we have to make them do all this? And I think that's what Paul Thoppel was always saying right from the beginning, right? Yeah. And also, the minister last December introduced the 10-year grants at I believe was at the AFN AGM, and mentioned that they were going to go for 100 10-year grant agreements for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Next slide, please. Out of that, we received 253 expression of interest across the country. You can see by the map up there. Where's my clicker guy? Somebody's not doing their job here. Okay, so you can see the map there. You can see by each region how many First Nations put in an expression of interest. That it's not a commitment to say you're interested in the process, you want to learn more about it. And at the end of the day, I believe that we received about 220 for First Nations interested in the financial statement portion and the FP ratios, which was quite positive. But the biggest part, what really mattered also, is the financial administration law or the financial administration bylaw. At the end of the day, next slide, please. Sorry. This is the process that it went through. We went through basically the FAL and the FAB, then an FP review, and then as of this morning, we gave the approval for recommendation for the last of the 10-year grant agreements that met both criteria for the FAL or FAB and the FP ratios. And now, then we presented to the government, and they were the ones that would propose the 10-year grants. Next one. Out of that, we made the mark of 100 First Nations. That's a little under half. Reason why is the First Nations, there was no issue in regards to the financial performance per se, but the biggest issue was the First Nations communities not moving forward on their financial administration law or bylaw. So this is by region. As of this morning, 52 First Nations from British Columbia will be moving forward on a 10-year grant agreement. Next one, please. So in regards to eligibility criteria, only 6 did not, out of all the country, only 6 didn't pass. didn't meet, I wouldn't say not passed, they didn't meet the requirements. So we have a 94% success rate, I would say. And that is true in regards to the 220 First Nations that we looked at in regards to their 5-year financials. So what we did is we looked at the 5-year past financials ending March 31st, 2018. Scott and his crew were very busy over the last 6 months, and so was the marketing, development, and stakeholder relations group. So out of that, what they really needed, like was talked about, you needed your FAL or FAB in place, and you had to pass the financial performance ratios. I'm not going to go into too much about the ratios, which is the next one, so we'll move on to capacity development. What does that mean now after you get a 10-year grant agreement? It talks about bringing your FAL or FAB to life, brings it to life, brings it into practice. Okay? And the best thing out of it all, it's at no cost. We have a number of First Nations right now. We're working on roughly about 100, and I believe about 147 First Nations across the country that are in the financial management systems process. Some are on the different very levels of completion, but they're working towards it. And it's quite astounding seeing all this work that's being done across the country by our marketing and capacity and intervention workers. Next one, please. So, in regards to the provisions of your FAL or FAB, we're looking to have the First Nations have the yellow provisions come into effect of April 1st, 2019, and then the green provisions in January 1st, 2020. So later down the road, our capacity development workers will be working with each of these communities. If they need assistance, we're there, we're open to assist you. So that's all I have to say. We look forward to assisting First Nations in regards to implementing their financial administration law or bylaw. We do have a very competent staff that work with us. I believe that since 2006, our results have proven that we have a very good track record, and that we look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Titus, for that update on the important work that your organization has been doing on behalf of advancing the new fiscal relationship with each of our communities. Thank you. A technical note, I want to point out to staff that the monitor up here for folks on stage is not working, so we're all getting a good network out, turning to look at the side screens to see what slide we're on. So if we could get that fixed, that would be wonderful. Our final panelist on this topic is, of course, Chief David Jimmy. Please put your hands together for Chief Jimmy.
Swale, Lenukuyat Toskui Tolitzel Kwa Squayala. Just want to acknowledge Bob Baker this morning for the opening prayer to start us off in a good way. Also acknowledge the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh for allowing us to conduct this important work today. My traditional name is Lenukuyat David Jimmy, Chief of Squayala First Nation, also President of the Chilkoyak Tribe and President of Stalo Nation Chiefs Council. Some of you also may know me. I had a little bodyguard gig a few years ago at the AFN for Minister Bennett, where I sat on stage and didn't say anything. I was just a part of the panel. And I'll answer the question that I keep getting about my knee. or my leg brace. We had a fire in the community, and unfortunately there were 2 dogs that were in a window, and no, I'm just kidding. I was playing hockey. We needed to liven everybody up a little bit here, right? I also don't have a slide deck, so if you want to run random pictures while I talk, so to keep people entertained, I'm okay with that. I don't have a slide deck because I don't have a lot to report on, because we're just getting started with the new advisory committee. We've had a few meetings so far, and really just starting to outline what our framework is going to look like, and some of the challenges and some of the discussion that has taken place to date. I also want to acknowledge some of, we got great presentations about some of the work that's been taking place to date, and we should feel, I'm one of those cynics, and I'm one of those people that always has questions about how we're gaining momentum and whether or not it's just down a path that gets us to another place that we went to 10 or 20 years ago. But I do have to feel this sense of optimism, and I'm reminded by those that have been through this process, those that have been around and were a part of all of these different reports and these efforts, and trying to transfer or to develop a new relationship, fiscal relationship with Canada. Those such as Harold Calla, who was a part of doing a lot of work over the years, instrumental in his contributions. I'm very fortunate in BC. I'm here as a representative on behalf of BC to the table, but I'm very fortunate because we have good expertise in BC. We've got the experience here. We've got talent at every table, every Chiefs Committee. We're always contributing, and you can see that when you go to the National Assemblies. I'm very fortunate to have the First Nations Summit, who contributed a lot of support in the work that I did on the Chiefs Committee on Fiscal. So I really wanted to acknowledge those for all of that work. I know the FMB has been extremely busy. It's important to recognize them for everything that they've done in the last year or so. It's not been an easy task. And so, I'm very fortunate because we do have people from BC on this committee. Harold is actually one that is now, he wasn't, I would turn to him for advice throughout our work with the Chiefs Committee on Fiscal. Now he's a member of this committee, which is a great influx of information for us. We've got chiefs from across the country, and I can honestly say that this is the most complex file that I've ever been involved with or ever worked on. You can think of the diversity that exists amongst our communities, all of the different departments that we're trying to operate when it comes to health, social development, children and family services, economic development, lands, rights and title. Across the board is very complex and complicated, and you hear in every presentation, and this is the expectation of so many of our people in the room that are trying to manage these band offices or tribal councils and gain an understanding to be able to contribute back, being underfunded, being underutilized, not having the resources available to do that work. So my hands, I know it was mentioned earlier, but my hands do go up to each and every one of you for your contributions in making, trying to get to that place on behalf of your communities. We have representation from all across the country. We have representation from treaty, non-treaty, lots of discussion on reserve, off reserve funding, looking at the different territories that don't necessarily have identified reserves, Indian Act bands, et cetera. The technical group that's involved in this committee, I have to say, has brought a wonderful light for me. I think being in the Chiefs Committee prior, I was a little bit at arm's length to the technical group that was working on our behalf. Now being right there beside them, you get to see and hear the amount of information that's been compiled for this file is absolutely crazy, and trying to get through it all and understand the differences when you talk about equalization payments or how there's different mechanisms for funding. My hat goes off again to all of those that are a part of it. Some of the things that we've been discussing, I mentioned a few of them, but I just wanted to touch on a couple because as we develop the framework and the ideas, everything that we talked about in the BC regional engagement sessions last year are still coming forward, but we're just breaking them down into sort of larger aspects of how we develop a new fiscal policy or framework. Housing, lacking funding comes up in every single conversation. And so when I hear Minister Bennett this morning talking about, the potential of resource revenue sharing, that's a hard one for me to hear, because as the original peoples of this country and the descendants of the original peoples of this country, when we talk about resource extraction and resource development, we've not been a part of that. We haven't been a part of that conversation. We don't receive the benefits of that. And I know the Aboriginal resource tax conversation has been taking place, which I'm definitely an advocate of. But it's awkward to hear that, we'll be talked to about the potential of resource, shared resource, monies, when it should be us having and directing that conversation. And you'll hear that from our leadership across the country. Some of the other issues around differences between remote communities, how that funding has to be accounted for, treaty versus self-government and Indian Act bans. The announcement of new monies, the $17 billion, clearly an amazing announcement, but I know everybody in here wants to understand and know, how do those funds get to us on the ground in the communities? So that's something that we want to flesh out and be able to map for everybody to see. Without getting it, having it stuck through all the different bureaucracy. There's been conversations around a statistics institute, revenue generation opportunities for First Nations, reviewed work from the Institute on Governance, all the previous reports that were done, so we're not starting from scratch, not having to reinvent the wheel. We're taking all of those reports into consideration. The objective statement for the new fiscal relationship confirms that First Nations will have access to the funding, autonomy, and fiscal capacity necessary to plan for and achieve their goals for the well-being of their community and citizens, achieve living standards and outcomes that are comparable to those experienced by other Canadians, provide high-quality public services to the citizens, regardless of their place of residence, and advance goals for political, social, economic, and cultural development. Some of the principles discussed are reconciliation, sufficiency, certainty, transparency, mutual accountability, autonomy again, truthfulness, objectivity, and sustainability. So as Paul had mentioned, there's going to be another round of engagement coming up with respect to this work, and so you'll see an announcement, and I'm still not sure how this is going to roll out. We did sort of a mad dash on our last round of engagement across the province, so we may also look to some other opportunities to be able to connect via email or have an intake website where we can receive information. So that's just really a brief update, because again, we're developing the framework sort of ideas and concepts, and I think that's going to flesh out next month at our next meeting. But just being able to come up and provide a bit of background for everybody on what we're doing, because the Chiefs Committee on Fiscal is essentially no longer, and this is the new body, the Joint Advisory Committee, that was a recommendation from that report at the AFN last year. We do have good support from the federal government. Paul has been a good advocate for the work and how we're trying to achieve these goals. Very open-minded. I can say that about Paul, that I've enjoyed working alongside him, and it's been a learning experience for him, and he's mentioned that plenty of times. But as you can hear in his presentation, it's resonating, and he's got a great handle on how we can move forward together. I'm sure there's a ton of questions around sort of Paul's presentation and the 10-year grant, so that's it. I wasn't going to go too long. I just wanted to provide a brief update on some of the work that's been done to date, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Jimmy, and I know this room is so grateful to have you in the role that you're in, the various roles that you're in, working on our behalf. So thank you very much. We actually don't have time for questions right now, just to keep our afternoon on track. But I think our speakers are probably here for the afternoon if you're lucky enough to catch them on a break and ask them a question. So one more time, could we put our hands together for Paul Topple, Brian Titus, and Chief David Jimmy? And we have some thank you gifts that my co-moderator will be sharing to thank you for your participation this afternoon. We have 2 sessions coming up. This is the last time today that we have you all in the room together. So give us just a couple of moments to make a couple of announcements while we have you here. Of course, immediately now, we don't have a break. We're going immediately into the next sessions. So in this room, we have a plenary on emergency management called Models of Resilience, which will be moderated by Harold. And we have 3 speakers on that panel. And then there is also an interactive breakout session in Ballroom D on economic development, economic capacity through reserve land management. The youth also, there is a panel happening in Mackenzie on education, internship, and career opportunities. And just a reminder for youth in the room to make sure that over the afternoon break, you come to Mackenzie for just a moment to prep for the meet and greet with Minister Bennett. Harold, do you have some more housekeeping announcements?
Yep.
Okay.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, this is the last time we'll be together as a plenary today, and so I just want to remind you of that. So a couple of other quick announcements. Don't forget to do, those of you who haven't had a chance, at the Service Excellence counter just outside the door here is the survey on the client service questionnaire. So make sure you fill that out, and we are doing some prizes on that. I also wanted to note, remember to do your travel claims, and that's at the registration desk as well. Don't forget, after the afternoon workshop, so we'll do the 2 o'clock, probably let's say 2:10 to 3:10, and then do a coffee break. There'll be some breaks available for you, but please visit the open house booths, which are here and upstairs. Don't forget those. I do want to remind you of the Housing and Infrastructure Council's reception this evening at 6 p.m. I believe that's upstairs. I'm just going to double. Yep, upstairs. So thank you very much, Chief George. Appreciate that. And presentations that have been shared here will be provided through Naut'sa website, and they'll send you an email after the meeting, so just so you know that. And just in terms of tomorrow's agenda, so please remember that our hot breakfast is available at 7:30, and then we do the welcome at 8:30. Also, don't forget the youth and elders are doing a bit of a breakfast as well, and being joined by, I believe it's by Chief Clarence Louis tomorrow. Yeah. And so I want to welcome my friend Chief Clarence Louis. Let me tell you my brief story about Chief Clarence Louis. We did strategic planning, and at the end of the strategic planning, he said, "Harold, I have to say that this strategic planning has not been a total waste of time." And wherever I go in Indian country, people say, if Chief Clarence Louis said that about your strategic planning, it must be very good. So I want to thank Chief Louis for that. All right, so let's take a break. We'll do a quick transition. And again, workshop in here. And then the other workshop is just in plenary, or in the ballroom D, which is just outside here in the area. I will invite those who are doing the housing, the emergency management models of resilience. So please come forward. Chief Rick McLean, Chief Larry Newski, and Chief Joe Alphonse. So please make your way to the stage, and we'll get started relatively shortly. Economic development, economic capacity through reserve land management, of course, is in the ballroom D. So sneak in that door or go out through the hallway. And the youth sharing knowledge, education, internships, and career panel, as Jesse has pointed out for us. And just as our presenters are making their way forward, I also want to remind you that there is the First Nations Business Forum on February 19th and 20th in Prince George, and the BC AFN Special Chiefs Assembly is taking place March 7th and 8th in Anklakatma and Silix Territory in Merritt, BC at the Nicola Valley Institute.